This talk is going to cover AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So we're going to look at what XML is, what asynchronous is, what also what JSON is, but most importantly what XmlHttpRequest is, XmlHttpRequest, which is the fundamental technology behind this. Okay, so as I indicated there, AJAX is short for asynchronous JavaScript and XML, which is not technology. It's a clever acronym, or a backronym if you like, because it's an acronym that mixes together a set of existing technologies, your HTML, CSS, the DOM in JavaScript, XML, XmlHttpRequest, more on which in a second, and JavaScript itself. Headline feature, it allows data to be requested from a server without refreshing the browser. So what is asynchronous JavaScript? So asynchronous calls are made through a HTTP resource in the background somewhere, and those calls can be made without blocking the current JavaScript from performing other tasks. So the JavaScript can continue to behave as it would do, and wait until it gets the data back. Once the data is received from the call, a callback function is called to handle the data in a response. AJAX technologies are asynchronous by definition, but they can be set to synchronous if you want, so that you can stop your application from doing anything until it gets the data back from the call that it makes. But in most instances, most people take the opportunity to do this thing asynchronously so that other things can be going on at the same time. So in AJAX there as well, we've got XML. So what is XML? So XML is extensible markup language. It's a subset of something called SGML, Standard Generalized Markup Language, which has been around a long time, since 1986. It's defined by W3C, the Web Standards Organization, and it's a markup language, a set of instructions to control and structure data, but in text documents. Very kind of similar to HTML, and HTML and XML have crossed paths, as we'll see in a second. So what does XML do? It's a meta language, it's a grammar for defining this particular markup language. It defines the structure of information, and it lets developers create information in a structured way that they can then transfer between each other in an agreed structure. XML itself isn't at all interested in presentation. There are languages that allow you to present XML if that's what you want to do, to make it look nice, but it is purely data. It's platform independent. XML is just text files. The documents are self-describing. They have tags, elements which are self-describing. It's nominally human readable because elements should be given clear text names, and the way that you structure the document is up to you, but it's defined in what's known as a scheme, or a DTD, a document type definition. So that's all very well in theory. What's that mean in reality? So let's take this data. So we've got sample data there, it's the kind of thing you can imagine in an Excel spreadsheet. Bus numbers, destinations, where they start from, peak interval. So you can imagine that data in a spreadsheet, in a database. What's it look like in XML? Well, it would look something like this. So where you've got tags that look very similar to HTML tags, and these are XML nodes, and I, as the developer, get to make these up. So I've got a buses node on the outside in which everything is wrapped, and for each line of data, if you like, there's a bus node that's then got a number, a destination, a start place, and an interval. And I can repeat that for another bit of data, repeat that again for another bit of data. So it's a simple textual representation of that data. And I could build up a huge amount of data like this. XML data can be transported across the wires. These are just text files, so if I found someone else interested in this kind of data, as long as we agreed the structure, we could pass that data to each other in a structured format, allowing each other to use that data in our back-end databases of one type or another. So you've got the data in this format, XML format, agreed format. We can transfer that around. And there's certain rules here. So the XML, if this is going to be read into a database, it needs to be robust. It needs to have all the elements closed in the correct fashion. It's case sensitive. Everything must be properly nested. There must be a root element. In this example, it was the buses tag is the root one. It's the top element there. And all attribute values, you can have attributes, there isn't in that example, but you can have attributes, they all must all be in quotes. So there are rules that the XML must follow, because it's we're reading it here as humans, but it's more often than not it is machine read. So it's got to be well structured so it can be read by a machine. You might want to put some HTML in there as well. It's entirely possible to do that. We use something called C data, character data, with this square bracket syntax, so you can put the likes of a paragraph tag inside of your HTML if that's something you want to do. Just as a little historical aside, I mentioned XML and HTML, a little bit of history. So we live very much now in a HTML5+ world. But at one point W3C did embark on a project to make HTML very similar to XML by developing something called XHTML. That was a technology that pursued for a while, so it was basically HTML that followed strict XML rules. But that's very much now been superseded by HTML5. All modern browsers will parse XML. You see here in Chrome, and when I look at this XML document, it presents it nicely here for me, showing me the document tree, and I can peel these open and examine the data. And JavaScript can be used to examine that document as well, because it's got a good document object model. It's nicely structured. We can navigate around that data using JavaScript. Just before we move on, just to show you that XML, because sometimes XML is considered a little bit old hat because it's very much been replaced in a lot of headline organisations by JSON, more of which later, but XML is certainly used out there. One example being XML is used for the tiling of the front pages in Windows. We follow on this link here, we see some information about how you can create tiles at Microsoft, and there's an XML document there that you can, so they've made up various nodes to format the tiles. So they're using XML there to do that, and it's still kicking around in various walks of life. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to XML, but let's read the real star of the show, which is XmlHttpRequest, or XHR for short. So, gave it on to Microsoft there because it was also Microsoft who introduced this technology as a way of facilitating the likes of web-based Hotmail and Outlook. You think about the way that web-based mail works. You log onto a web page, you send email, you receive email. You're not continually refreshing the web page as you are with a traditional web page. So something's going on in the background, some kind of call is going on in the background to receive data from some resource somewhere and then add it into the page. So they developed this, they labelled it up as XmlHttpRequest, XHR. Got adopted by Google, Mozilla and everybody else, and it's become a fundamental part of the AJAX concept. So it's the JavaScript and the asynchronous element of AJAX. But it's not only, as I've hinted there, it's not only XML that we can load with this technique, you can also load other data types, the headline one being JSON. which is JavaScript object notation. More on that in a bit. So traditionally, you would make a HTTP request to from a client to a browser, and that browser would respond with data of some kind, or files of some kind: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, XML, JSON. That's the kind of traditional request response paradigm. Those requests, let's say in terms of AJAX, those requests are very often go to what is known as an endpoint. So an endpoint is a URL address where data can be found and returned to that application. Sometimes referred to these as APIs. And the endpoints can return a variety of different data formats, of which the most common are XML and increasingly JSON. So the disadvantages of normal HTTP requests is you've got to refresh the page to get the latest data. Pages can be cached and they can be stateless. So we continue having to refresh the page, for example, to get new stock updates is going to be a little bit tedious, and the impetus is on the user to do that. Whereas with XHR, XML HTTP request, what happens is that the JavaScript can be triggered to make the HTTP request for you. So the server response is sent back down to the client, to the browser, and then the browser can manage that response via JavaScript and use that data, assuming it's data, can use that data to place it inside of your web page. The advantages of this: you don't need to reload the page, you don't need to refresh. You can manipulate the page through JavaScript, so new data from the server can come down via JavaScript. You can upload that information without having to refresh the whole page, which saves on bandwidth. It leads to a faster, more interactive, more user-friendly, fluid web experience. So let's look at some code. So we'll start off with, this is the original XHR. This is XmlHttpRequest. So you would make a new XmlHttpRequest object, so in here, and then we could call the open method of that to make a get call. So it's going to make a HTTP get call to this endpoint, and indicating it's going to be asynchronous. This is true. We can add an event listener to this. There's events associated with AJAX calls, XHR calls, such as ready state change, that we can use to detect when changes occur in the transaction. And we have a callback function here of show data. This is a function that will get called when we have a ready state event triggered. Before we do that, we then send the thing. So within the settings there in the open method, you've got the HTTP method, get or post. You've got the URL you're sending the request to, can be local, could be across the wires to someone else's server. Whether you want it to be asynchronous or not, and there's options to authenticate with usernames and passwords. Okay, so let's see an example of this. So here is an example. We are going to call the buses.xml file, which I've got on my local file set here. So there's that data again that you saw previously. And we're going to make an XHR request call. We use get, there's the ready state event, and we're going to console out the response into the console with console.dir. So this is just running on a local server, so we'll go to this one here. So let me right click and inspect, bring up the network traffic first of all. So we go to network. If I just refresh again, you'll notice that under network, as well as familiar things like image and JS and CSS, we've got XHR, so that's our XML HTTP request calls, and we can see the call going out there to buses. If I click on that, I can see the data that's responded. Under the headers, I can see I get a HTTP status of 200, so that's good. It's received a response, and we can see the data there. And I've just consoled the data out to here so that we could see the XML data in there as well. Okay, so the ready state change, when it's triggered, it will send an event object through to the function that's handling the event. So here's our EV, and that can what we could do is we got our XHR object, and we can look at what the state is of our call to the AJAX call, so we can see whether it's sent, open, loading, or done. So we would hope for a 4 to be returned, and if we get a 4 back, we could then do something. So that would be a tidier example of the XHR one. As we saw in that example, when you get the data back, if it's XML data, we have a property XML response.xml. If we've got some other kind of data, we've got response.text. That's probably used for JSON data. But there are others. Documents, array buffers, and blobs can be used with this technology as well. But these two are the main ones, and we'll see there's other techniques involved here as well. Once you've got the XML back, you then need to kind of navigate around it to extract the bits that you need, and that would need DOM navigation techniques, JavaScript to manipulate around through the nodes and the child nodes to extract what you're after. So here's an example where we get the bus number out by navigating our way through the XML structure of that particular file. Okay, so response.text, we use this for JSON, but also for text files and other non-XML files. So in this example, we're making a call to a text file, and we say response.text in the XmlHttpRequest object as we get it back, and then we could use that data in we could add that to the DOM in some way. So here we go, we've got a little text file. Let me inspect that for you so we can see the network call going out here. If we refresh, it goes to that text file. That text file has just got this simple text in it. We can retrieve that and we can add that to the DOM. Okay, so I've mentioned JSON a few times. So JSON is JavaScript object notation. It's become a hugely popular way of representing data. XML is fine, but it's sometimes just viewed to be a little bit too verbose. So JavaScript object notation has become massively popular, and it works on the basis of having a name and then a value. These are actually JavaScript objects, and the discovery of these, if you like, is credited to a guy called Douglas Crockford. And the idea is that you can have a name and a value, and a name and a value, and you can keep adding data in that format, and you can get arrays of these, so you can have huge amounts of data in a very simple format, which can be looped around and data extracted. So the nice lean files. So let's just consider JavaScript objects first. So JavaScript objects are defined in curly braces, and you can have a name and a property. So you can have a name and a value, a name and a value, a name and a value, and that would generate a JavaScript object for me. JSON is slightly different in that in the JSON world, all the names must be placed in double quotes, and you can't have any methods. So the values must be strings, numbers, objects, arrays, booleans, or nulls. You can't have methods associated with an object, which is something that you can do with JavaScript. So the following is a valid JavaScript object here. So notice lack of quotes, and this is valid JSON because the name value are placed in quotes, commas separating them. Let's have a look at a little bit of more serious bit of JSON. So I mentioned endpoints. let's have a look at a live endpoint. So this is Yorkshire Water, and I'll just get the path right. So what Yorkshire Water have done is they've opened up an endpoint so that we can access data. And so this is live data coming off their servers, and you can see that we've got JSON here. We've got things separated in. We've got our names, we've got our values for different incidents, and you can see in quotes there the different values, latitude and longitude where these things have taken place, the location it's affected, the description, the category, the date, the ID within their application, and there's loads of this data in here that they've made available for developers like ourselves to use in our own applications, which is great. You'll notice I'm in Chrome here, and what I've got installed is this JSON formatter Chrome extension, so it displays the JSON nicely like that. If you look at it raw, it's just a load of text, but it's a load of text formatted in the JSON format, so it can easily be parsed to look like that. You see, that's nice and readable. Notice the square brackets. So very commonly with complex JSON, you've got an array. So we've got an array of objects. There's one object there, and then we've got another and another and another separated by the commas. And it's not the case here, but one of these values could be another object. So if you like, that gives you the opportunity to create kind of two-dimensional arrays of data. Loads of validation tools, so you can write your own JSON, you can validate against these to make sure that it is valid, it's robust, it follows the rules as dictated there with quotes around the names, etc. So I say you can have arrays of this stuff. It's very common to have an array of objects. So in this example we've got Dickens, we've got an array of different titles of books with information there, title, when it was published, so that's kind of one row of data, and then we could have another. We could easily extend that out with more data per book or more books. So JSON becoming increasingly popular. XML in a lot of places being superseded by JSON. Case in point is Facebook. Facebook used to have something called FBML, Facebook XML, and that's got replaced now, so that Facebook use JSON for most of their kind of data transfers. Beauty of JSON, it's less complicated to traverse, massively popular for APIs, if you've just seen there from Yorkshire Water, because the files are lighter and easily manipulated by JavaScript, because it is JavaScript. So if we wanted to make an XHR call to a resource like that, we could create our XmlHttpRequest object. We could set up a ready state, we could get call, in this case we're calling the Dickens JSON file, retrieve that data, and so this response text property of our object can now be read and consoled into there. Now in this example here, let's go over to here, let's change this so that it uses the data from Yorkshire Water instead. So I'll just save that, and we'll go over here and refresh that. So rather than going for the XML this time, it's going to go across to Yorkshire Water. So there is the call, and there you can see there's the data responding. So I can see the XHR call going out, and there's all that data there coming back from Yorkshire Water that I could then choose to add into my application. Okay, right, so once you've got the data, you then need to manipulate it in some way, and there are some methods associated with this. So we have JSON.parse. So JSON.parse will convert, as the data comes across the wire, it comes as a string. So if we want to manipulate it as a JavaScript object, we pass it into a JavaScript object. So if this is our data coming back in here, when we pass it, we'll be able to console it out and see that it is actually a JavaScript object. Let's try that with our previous example here. So let me just switch that back. So we get our data from Yorkshire Water. We'll console it down here first of all. So let's make that response.text first of all. Let's show you what that looks like. So this isn't XML just now, it's JSON, so ignore that header there. We're using JSON now in this little example. In fact, let me just jump here because here's one I prepared earlier. Right, so this is better. So here we've got the data. We've got a little bit of data there, a little simplistic bit of JSON data. We'll make the call to that. We'll get the data out with response.text. We'll parse it, and then let's have a nosy at it. So let's switch these off for now. We'll come to these in a second. Right, so let's go out and test this. Right, here we go. So the call has gone out to my little JSON file. There's the data being responded. Look at the console. There's an array of 4 objects. That's the raw text, just as a string as far as JavaScript is concerned. Run it through parse. It's an array of objects, and I can see all the data there to use within my application. Let's change it to the more complex data from Yorkshire Water. So we'll switch that over. Should work exactly the same. So there's all the raw data, and then down here we've got an array of 25 objects with all the data in there, and what I can then do is use that data in my pages. Okay, so parsing the data will change it from a string into an object so that we can manipulate that, or most commonly an array of objects. Now, the opposite of parse is JSON.stringify. So if we want to send data back to the web server, which we often do, then we can stringify that data. So that will convert a JavaScript object back into a string, which can be sent the other way. So if we go back to this example here, let's switch it to the more lightweight data example, and let's switch these on here. So we're going to stringify our data and console it to have a look at it, see what it looks like. Back to the browser, refresh. Right, so we get the data in like that, we convert it like that with parse. Let's switch it back again. It might have been changed in the interim, but there's the data back as a string, and that's a string that we can send over the wires back to our application somewhere, our database in the cloud or wherever it happened to be. Right, now there are lots of opportunities and other options with this stuff. So I've shown you XHR. That's pretty old school. It's a nice robust way of working, but over the years developers have used helper methods provided by jQuery, like post and get JSON, which does exactly what it says on the tin. Or indeed there's an AJAX method, which is a full fat method from jQuery, which gives you a big list of options for making these AJAX style calls. There's also libraries like Axios, which is a lightweight AJAX library, so it abstracts away a lot of that XmlHttpRequest code. And if you've got a browser that supports, is a modern browser that has support for ES6, ECMAScript 6, which was a big upgrade to JavaScript a few years back, then we have a new method called fetch. Now the beauty of fetch is it brings XmlHttpRequest up to date with something called promises, and it has much easier syntax. Let's have a look at some of these examples. So first of all, if I was using jQuery, well, I'd need the jQuery library, so I would load that in, and then what I could do is I could make a $getJSON call. that would be the API. That's the path to the endpoint I want to call, and then have a callback function, and this will have the data in it. Let's show you that working. So this is a jQuery one. So if I look at the network traffic first of all, you'll see that we are loading jQuery in. Under XHR, there's the call to the Yorkshire Water instance. I get all the data back, and I've consoled that as well, so we can see there's 25 instances. Low pressure on Avenue Terrace. Right. Now, what about this new fetch example though? Because you might not want to use jQuery because you've got to download the jQuery library. So if you've got a browser that is more modern, you can use fetch. So let's just show you this guy here. So we can use fetch. So there's our data coming in again. There's the similar data. Still problems at that Avenue Terrace. And can I use this on my browser? So can I use fetch on Chrome? Yes, I can. You see IE11 not so good there. So there is a fair bit of red here, but on a modern browser we can still use this. Right, so let's hop back, and you saw the data working. So let's have a look at the code behind that. So the great thing about this, nice and simple, we have, that's our endpoint, that's where I want to get data from. We use the fetch method, and it takes the path of our resource as its parameter, and then it uses something called a promise. So we can then chain in a then, and I'm using arrow syntax here, more of which later on. So we can receive the data, and we have a response.json to receive that data. We then bounce that onto a second promise in order to extract the JSON. So this here becomes our JSON data. And you saw that being extracted there. Or if I wanted it to do something more interesting, to appear in the DOM, then that's what this kind of thing does. It loops around. In this instance, it's looping around that data, extracting it and adding it to the DOM, so that we will now, some of it will appear. So I do need something in the DOM for that to sit next to, which I've not got. So let's add something up here then. So we'll say div. We have an ID. We need an ID of DOM. So we'll say div hash DOM. Right, let's try that. So it's going to look a bit messy, this, if it works. There we go, loads of data coming in. So I need to get a little bit more sophisticated. Tell you what, it's using the wrong data set. That's why it's not picking up so cleverly. Let's just switch that around. There we go. So there's our names that are coming from our JSON file, and I'm extracting those and adding them to the DOM. Now, as you might be getting appreciation there, it gets a little bit messy when you start adding stuff to the DOM. That's where you need other skills to be brought into the mix, but we can look at that in a later lesson. Okay, thank you very much.